Nearly 5 years into the Russia-Ukraine war, Putin is still fighting. Ukraine has taken some L's but are still fighting back. Europe is still nervous, and NATO has still not directly gone into war with Russia. So the question is obvious. Is Putin exposing NATO as a paper tiger? A giant alliance, big talk, nice flags, no real bite. That narrative sounds good, but I think that take is a bit too lazy. Because what this war has actually exposed is not that NATO is fake, is that NATO is powerful, slow, cautious, and deeply political, and those are not the same thing. A lot of people look at this war and think, Russia invaded Ukraine, the war dragged on, NATO did not directly intervene, therefore NATO is weak. But that skips the important detail. Ukraine is not a NATO member. That matters a lot. NATO's core premise is Article 5. Attack one member and the alliance responds. Ukraine does not fall under that guarantee. So if you're judging NATO for not launching a direct war with Russia over a non-member state, you are not really judging NATO honestly. You're judging NATO for not doing something it is never formally built to automatically do. That is completely different. If Putin truly believed NATO was empty, he would have been far more reckless with NATO territory itself, not just Ukraine. Because the real test of NATO is not whether it sends troops into a non-member war. The real test is whether Russia is willing to attack an actual NATO country. And it has not done that. Why? Because for all the talk, Russia still understands the risk. NATO has nuclear powers, massive air power, deep industrial capacity, huge combined military budgets. So no, this does not look like Putin exposing NATO as fake. It looks more like Putin pushing everywhere around NATO while avoiding a direct collision with it. That is not contempt, that's caution. And ultimately, this is the part that kills the paper tiger idea for me. Russia invaded Ukraine partly because it hated Western expansion near its borders. And what happened? Finland joined NATO on April 4th, 2023. Sweden joined NATO March 7th, 2024. So after all of this destruction, NATO did not shrink, it expanded. And that is a strategic failure for Putin, a big one. If your enemy ends up larger, more armed and more unified after your war begins, it's hard to say you ever exposed them as a fake. You may have exposed their slowness, you may have exposed their internal arguments, but you're also triggering their consolidation, and that is not nothing. But if we are to be 100% honest, this war absolutely exposed weaknesses. NATO countries were too complacent, too dependent on the US, too slow on weapons production, and too comfortable after the Cold War. That part is real. The alliance talks big, but getting 30 plus countries aligned is messy. Aid packages stall, politics gets in the way, public patience fades, industrial output takes time. So yes, Putin exposed something. He exposed that NATO is not a clean war machine, it's a coalition, a bureaucracy, a political structure before its trigger-happy empire. And that's what makes it look weak from the outside sometimes. But slow does not mean soft, and messy does not mean meaningless. Since the full-scale invasion, NATO says it has carried out the biggest reinforcement of collective defence in a generation. It has more troops on the eastern flank. It says it now has 500,000 troops at high readiness. Allies have kept weapons, money and training flowing into Ukraine. And according to NATO, allies have provided the overwhelming majority of military aid to Kiev. So while people online scream that NATO is weak, the alliance has actually been hardening in the background. Quietly, not perfectly, but materially. And Russia has also paid a huge price too. This war has not made Russia look unstoppable. It has made the war look grinding, expensive, and far harder than Moscow expected. Putin did not prove NATO is a joke. He proved that pressure below the threshold of direct NATO-Russia war can be effective. Cyber attacks, disinformation, energy pressure, proxy wars, political division, and war against non-members. And that is where the West looks awkward, because NATO is strongest in clear military deterrence. It is weaker in the grey zone, and Putin understands that. He knows that if he attacks a NATO member directly, the risk explodes. So instead, he pushes everywhere just below the line and watches the alliance argue with itself. That is not the same as beating NATO, but it is a real strategic lesson. So of nearly 5 years of war, is Putin showing that NATO is nothing more than a paper tiger? No, not really. What he is showing is that NATO is powerful but cautious, rich but slow, lethal in theory, political in practice. He has not proved NATO is fake. He has proved that the West struggles most in long, messy, indirect conflict, and that matters too, because the real danger is not that NATO is nothing, the real danger is that its enemies understand exactly where it hesitates.